Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. This is another of my my ad lib attempts. People say they like them better, even though they're a little less structured and organized than my scripted ones. This is on a very powerful topic for me, important topic for me, and that is strictness as opposed to lenience. Society has, over recent decades, moved to emphasizing and prioritizing and venerating lenience. We venerate the kindly, understanding judge over the strict hanging judge. We tend to give higher student evaluations to the professor who is kindly in grading rather than strict, and teachers who tend to be kindly rather than who are strict. Uh, Parenting guidelines tend to emphasize. Certainly, I'm not at all emphasizing corporal punishment. I consider that an absolute no-no. But parenting that tends to be more understanding than strict. The T-Berry Brazelton types of the world are more honored than the tough love types, for sure. That's true of how we've treated drugs. Alcohol and drugs, we not only are shrugging our shoulders at it, we're legalizing it despite the truly significant medical evidence that it is dangerous to one's mental and physical health. I did a review of it for Time magazine, and anyway, it doesn't matter. So I want to talk about some examples. And it may seem hyperbolic to you, but I really believe it's not. I think that the emphasis on lenience is core to America's descent into third world status as Asian countries are ascending. Those countries are far less subject to undue lenience. And I want to start with great inflation. It has profoundly important impacts on this country, on all of us. In the 1960s, 16% of college students got an A. Now it's almost half, 48%, something like that. What does that mean? First of all, it positively rewards, for example, the student who waited till the last second to write a paper or study for their exam, and makes them more likely to be lazy in the future and procrastinate. It punishes the truly worthy, say that 16%, who deserved an A legitimately, and they will appear indistinguishable to employers from the student who was mediocre and got an A. And when employers, of course, grade point average is merely one data point, but when it's harder for an employer to determine who the candidate who is really the hardest working, brightest, whatever, that has all kinds of bad sequelae. First of all, it punishes the applicant who was indistinguishable but who really deserved an A. It punishes the coworkers who now must work with employees who are less ideal, less optimal than they could have gotten. When less than optimal people are hired, the products and services, directly or indirectly, are made worse, so all the customers are hurt. And in turn, the shareholders for large companies, who are not just fat cats, but can be teachers and social workers and plumbers who have any of their money in a 401k or a mutual fund, their hard-earned money yields less return. And in turn, America, in the largest sense, is less able to be competitive with countries in Asia, hence China's and India's ascendancy as we descend. So grade inflation, while seemingly not a big deal, and indeed students give far better student evaluations to professors who are lenient in their grading than tough graders, I think that's a huge, huge mistake. That extends certainly to the workplace, in which bosses tend to shrug their shoulders at marginal performers. That has a huge effect on all those things I mentioned first. Coworkers don't feel as proud of being at a quality workplace because there's a lot of sloth that goes on. This is especially true, to be honest, in government, where it's very difficult. Most people don't get fired. They stay even, they've got amazing job security. And that's why we don't necessarily consider government the model of efficiency, efficient use of our tax dollars, or efficient providing of services. But certainly even in the private sector, there are many companies or many bosses who simply tolerate mediocre performance, when really if they made a little effort, they could find a better employee, or at minimum, demote weaker employees to positions where they'll do less harm. Again, that hurts the coworkers, it hurts the customers, it hurts the shareholders, and in turn it hurts American competitiveness. It also extends to certainly to judges. A judge who tends to be a lenient judge versus compared to a hanging judge is going to put more criminals on the street earlier, thereby endangering law-abiding people. And these are not just in abstractions. Somebody who's the victim of a violent crime, even if it's not murder or assault, we do feel violated and scared if our home gets invaded and they steal our stuff. It also sends a message to the miscreant that the penalty won't be that bad. It gives a message to society that we value the criminals more than we value the general public. Indeed, I see so much media with prisoner rights pieces, advocacy. I don't see so many victims' rights pieces. Does that really make the country better? Or creates an ethos of focusing on the least among us, as the New Testament calls it, as opposed to merit? And of course it extends to the home. A romantic partner who's live-in, who doesn't do what he or she says, whether it be cleaning the dishes and when they say they will, or God forbid, they physically or psychologically abuse the partner, and the partner accepts it, tolerates it, shrugs their shoulders. That rewards that behavior and makes it more likely to occur again, including with abuse. When that abuser, male or female, whether it be physical abuse or psychological abuse, and believe me, the psychological abuse can be very, very painful. When that person is contrite, and then the other spouse or the live-in partner, or it doesn't have to be live-in, partner, forgives them, gives them another chance, that makes it more likely to occur again and doesn't do a thing to help the person in the long run. Usually. Nothing is always true, but usually. Similarly, as a parent, if a parent, when the kid throws a temper tantrum and indulges it and gives in, and the kid wants dessert first, and the parent gives the kid dessert, or even responds at all to that temper tantrum, when the kid's giving that kid attention, like a hug or listening to them or whatever, that's rewarding the tantrum. And that's true of everything, cleaning up their room. Being strict seems deemed a hard ass, intolerant, not understanding externalities, all the multiple factors. But all that understanding tends to, in net, result in worse behavior individually and societally. This even extends to friends who say they're going to call, and then they don't call. Or even a running partner who shows up routinely 5 or 7 minutes late as you're standing out there. Once you accept that and tolerate it, you suffer more, they're more likely to do it. The other person is less likely to want to be prompt in the future. And in turn, we have a worse population, people who tolerate slipshod behavior. So whether it's a grade inflating teacher or professor, an employer who's understanding and tolerant of less good workers than he or she could find, a judge who tends to mete out lenient sentences, and even for drugs. I'm not talking about doing more than giving a traffic ticket like fine for somebody who is caught using drugs, but the dealer is profoundly affecting society, hurting society. And so the lenient sentence, given the very high recidivism rate, merely puts him back on the streets. But the lenient judge is really hurting society, and we shouldn't venerate them as kindly and understanding. We should be much more appreciative of the strict judge and the strict teacher who has high standards for her children, his children. When I was a teacher, I had very high standards, but it was all born out of love. I certainly never hit a kid, or I don't yell. But when that first kid on day one of my class started to whisper, and the rest of the class was seeing how I'd respond, and I gave the kid the school marm look, and I explained that I have high standards in my class because I care about you. And we're going to be proud to be a member of this class. And we're going to get to do amazing things if you can be well behaved like this. We can do things that require a lot of intrinsic motivation, like doing plays. I rewrote The Sound of Music, The Wizard of Oz, and Oliver into one period long plays, and we did them for the school. And everybody benefited, the kids, the parents, the other students, which I certainly couldn't do if I had chaos in my classroom. And those kids came away from my class with a higher sense of self-efficacy, pride in themselves, and values that will lead to themselves having high standards and more success in life. There's a little bit of a digression. And finally, certainly having very high standards with your spouse and kids. Zero tolerance for physical or silence abuse. Relatively zero tolerance for misbehavior, whether it be tantrums or not cleaning up their room or talking back to you. No reason I can't discuss with you, make a counter-argument, but there are certainly limits by far to that. In any case, forgive us for being a little longer than it's usually. This is 12 minutes, but I think it's a profoundly underrated topic, the issue of leniency versus strictness. And so I believe it's worthy. It's important for us as individuals and for society. So I thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko. I welcome your thumbs up or thumbs down, your sharing it on social media, your comments, and certainly subscribing. In any event, thanks again for watching. I am Marty Nemko.